Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the SIKH Channel Legal Show. I'm joined today by our regular contributor, Kulwinder Kaur, who is an employment law expert. Kulwinder, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
We want to speak today about how members of the workforce, staff, employees can ask their employer for a wage rise. I know that Karthik, who's helping record this program today, is well deserving of a pay rise. He works extremely hard for SIKH Channel, going over and beyond the requirements of his job. And he does it out of a sense of service to the community. And he has my vote and my support for a pay rise. But how do staff members approach their employers and ask for a pay rise?
Well, I think the best way to do so would be to schedule a meeting with your employer and really go in there with a clear strategy in terms of how you want to request a pay increase. So make sure you have some pointers in terms of if you know that your job role has a certain bracket or your industry in particular, somebody doing the similar job as you, what they're earning, speak to recruiters, get an idea, do your research so you have some sort of benchmark as well. So go in armed with that information, I would say. And in hand with that, also go in with a list of pointers in terms of how you're adding value to your employer. For example, do they know that you have other skills? Maybe you haven't told them, that you have additional skills outside of the workplace which can be utilized in the workplace. And whether you have other certificates or other experience that you've not necessarily told them. Maybe you're doing things beyond your original role, such as training other employees or taking on additional duties. So what I would recommend is going armed with that information so that you can set out your stall in the best possible way. And it's going to be a case of persuading the employer to see the level of value that you're bringing to the employer so that you can best present your case forward in terms of the percentage increase that you're seeking.
And as with everything, timing is very important in life. Is it a good time to do this? And should a member of staff select a particular time of year or a time in the stage of the business?
Well, the employer would probably say there's never a good time to do so, but perhaps once at the beginning of a new tax year is usually a good starting point. However, what I would say is don't leave it too long. If you feel that maybe you've been in a role for a number of years and you've never had a pay increase, it's better to do it sooner rather than later, because otherwise, before you know it, it may be another year's passed, or new members of staff have joined, and then you may get fobbed off with, we don't have a budget. Employers always have a budget, so it's important to know your value, know your worth, and ask for the pay increase. They can say no, or they may say it's something that they will review later on. But if you don't ask, you don't get. That's always my philosophy in life.
And is it easier in some industries and some jobs as opposed to others? For example, where there's a big demand. At the moment, there's a big demand for lorry drivers, and many other sectors are experiencing a shortage.
Yes, that's right. In some sectors in particular, you could go in asking for a higher percentage because you know that there's demand. And the employer would need to think carefully. Do they want to incur additional cost in recruiting and training somebody else to bring them up to speed, or do they actually want to retain you as a valuable employee and not have to spend that money on recruiting new member of staff? So yes, it can vary, but again, do your homework and find out what sort of percentages you're playing with, because the more demand, the more you can potentially ask as an increase.
And where it becomes a difficult situation and an employee feels aggrieved and wants to have a pay rise, feels he deserves a pay rise or is being treated differently to others, then it may become a formal and might even end up in the. Can you tell us about that?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
If it becomes a formal matter and becomes a tribunal matter, where there's a breakdown in the relationship and the employee feels is being treated unfairly and he deserves a pay rise, it's not just merely an ask, but an entitlement or a right that is being perhaps abused by the employer.
Yes, well, it would depend on the exact circumstances of the case, but if there's employees, your fellow co-workers doing a similar job, then to you, then you should be on equal pay regardless of the gender. So there could be some potential discrimination there. However, what I would say is to raise that as a grievance and really set out why you think it's you feel that you're being discriminated against, and it may be something that can be resolved internally and quite amicably. But if it's not, then it may be best to seek legal advice and issue a claim at the tribunal. However, before doing so, you would need to seek conciliation through the ACAS service. So they may be able to resolve the issue before it even gets to tribunal as well. So something to always bear in mind.
And are there risks attached with going to tribunal? Could an employee be treated unfairly or suffer in their job if they pursue the right to a pay increase?
Well, no, the employee shouldn't suffer any detrimental treatment, and if they do, then again, that's something that can be brought up at the tribunal. So an employee shouldn't feel fearful of raising anything that they're unhappy with at the risk of suffering any different treatment or anything detrimental. So they shouldn't be, but if they are, that's again a matter to bring up again as part of their overall claim with the tribunal.
Of course, and there's always two perspectives to this matter of salary increase. There's the perspective of the employer within a period of high inflation and a shortage of people, and employers are already having to increase salaries and wages to attract workers, for example, drivers, and in the hospitality sector, there's a big shortage and so on. And so, are employers in a difficult situation? Do they have to simply capitulate and meet the demands of employees, or can they resist salary increases? Whilst we want workers to be paid more, it could also be inflationary and cause a negative impact upon the economy.
Yes, well, it's a matter for each employer to consider, and what they need to do is really balance that in terms of having a look at their budget, having a look at the economy, and seeing where they can make increases, because there's always a risk that they will lose valuable members of staff if they don't do so. And some economies, as you mentioned, are worse hit than others. And it may be that there's going to be a lot of employees seeking an increase due to the increased cost of living. So it's something that employers need to consider carefully, whilst also bearing in mind their own business strategy and budgets going forward.
Isn't it just simply a case of a member of staff walking, taking the simple route of leaving and get a high paid job? I mean, in reality, what would you recommend a person to do? Would you recommend they stick it out and try and fight for that pay rise? Or if they can, just go for another job elsewhere?
I would say long gone are those days where a job was for life, and especially after the pandemic, what a lot of people have realized is that jobs are flexible. There is no guarantee in life, and that's made a shift in the way people work, how they work, where they work, and also some people have decided that actually they want to change their career path altogether. So I think the employment world has become a lot more flexible, and employees have realized that they don't need to stick out a job that they're not happy with just because the longevity looks so good on their CV. So what I would say is raise your case with an employer, and if they're not prepared to budge and you know your worth, then absolutely go where you're celebrated and go for that promotion, go for that new role where you are being rewarded for your time and effort and your skills and experience.
Absolutely. And Kulwinder, the world has changed since the pandemic. We've seen people now want to work less and give a higher priority to leisure time, to family time, to the value of life. Many, not thousands, perhaps over 1 million people worldwide die as a result of the COVID pandemic. So it has brought life change to many people, and people want a different lifestyle. And it may not just be a pay rise, people want to have flexible working. And how do you request homework? Is it the same way as a pay rise?
Yes, so with regards to the flexible working, we spoke about this before, and it would need to be a request that's been made under the statutory provisions to the employer. So there's a whole set of guidelines around that, and really making sure that you're presenting your case. But in order to qualify for that, you must have been employed with the same employer for a period of 26 weeks. So, again, that's something that you would need to check to make sure that you do qualify for that. And it will be a case of presenting your case to the employer, and setting out what it is that you want, how you see that flexibility. Is it a change of hours? Is it going to be doing the same number of hours from home? So is it going to be compressed over, say, 4 days as opposed to 5 days? So really explaining how you see that, because if the request is granted, then naturally the terms of your employment contract will change. So the employer will be looking at that, and also looking at the impact on your colleagues, your team, and the business overall. So again, it's going to be a matter of persuasion and really balancing your needs, as well as looking and appreciating the employer's perspective, and having an argument to go back with them too. For example, if they say, the business needs may suffer, to really, as part of your request, set out how you're going to deal with that. For example, if you're saying you want to work 4 days, can you be flexible with the fifth day if there's demand, to cover staff shortages, for example, if there's if you're in the legal profession and you have to cover a hearing at short notice, are you going to be flexible around that, or covering other shifts for colleagues? So really having a look at counter arguments and making sure that you include that in your request should hopefully, fingers crossed, make your request successful.
That's great. Thank you very much. And the current environment is unprecedented. We've had a worldwide pandemic. We've had a change in lifestyle with home working. There's also demographic changes. There's an aging population. A lot of people have retired early. Are we in a perfect storm for industrial unrest? Do you think we'll see lots of strikes in the coming year or so over pay and conditions? With a shortage of labour, are we in for some difficult times?
Yes, I mean, potentially these things can arise, and sometimes it can be quite unexpected, but there definitely seems to be some underlying issues which we could see potential more strikes, particularly with the NHS, for example. That's an industry where medics are hugely undervalued, and whilst we appreciated them more so during the pandemic, they're still not getting the recognition that they deserve. So that's definitely one area to watch for.
That's great. And so, in this era of uncertainty, really, what advice would you give to people who are working, ordinary working people in jobs? And many of our viewers will be employed. Some will also be employers, employing other people in small businesses. And so it's not a clear case of winners and losers. It could be a case of both parties, employers and employees, lose the ability to run their business efficiently and profitably. Then the business will also suffer and they can't grow or employ more people or look after their staff. So we are potentially into a vicious circle. What do you think about that?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree. I would agree. There could be potential problems on both sides. So it's a case of having been through the pandemic. Hopefully people have realized and started to appreciate each other a little bit more, especially in the employment sector, with the employer and employee relationship. So regardless of the job role or which industry we're discussing, it's still the same employer employee relationship. So it's a case of really trying to appreciate both points of view before raising issues, and trying your best to resolve these issues in an amicable fashion, which is really going to help both parties to nurture and retain that relationship, as opposed to causing unnecessary friction, or having employees walk out, for instance, or having that friction in the workplace where the employer is having to address issues in various meetings. And usually when one employee raises an issue, you're opening up those floodgates for other employees to jump on the bandwagon on some occasions. So I think it's a lot easier for issues to be nipped in the bud, and to try to work together if you want to salvage relationships and grow together. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. Teamwork makes for greater success for everybody rather than having a them and us approach, adversarial approach, staff against employers. It should be teamwork and conciliatory. But you are a litigator and you're involved in the court process. And when you get involved, Kulwinder, and your cases go to tribunal, it's very much an adversarial system, one side against the other. Tell us about that. How does that feel when you have to fight?
Yes, I mean, the fact that I represent businesses and they usually come to me to say it's a matter of principle, we haven't done anything wrong, and they feel quite aggrieved that the employees are making what they say fictitious claims, or you know they're being hostile, or they just want to sort of have their day in court. What I would say is, having assessed the merits, and what I would do is assess the merits from the outset and all the way along the case, throughout the case up to trial, and always have a look at these things from a commercial point of view. Can they be resolved? Because if they can, even if it's a matter of making a commercial settlement, is it worth the employer's time and energy to pursue this matter in a final hearing, which could be lasting more than one day? Often it could be 3 to 4 days, 5 days, longer. And so it's a case of really balancing that up and having a look at where your time could be better utilized. And it although it may feel very personal, as if it is, a matter of principle, there is always a good idea to really weigh up the commercial sense in these matters, because I've seen cases which have gone away for £500, which at the beginning both parties were adamant they didn't want to settle. So I think there needs to be a pragmatic approach to these cases. It's definitely something that employers should bear in mind.
It's very good advice not to become emotionally entangled or start taking points of principle, but to be practical, pragmatic, and think about time, energy, and quality of life for everybody involved in these cases. That's very good advice. Thank you very much. Davinder Kaur, Employment Law Specialist, thank you for joining the legal show and discussing very difficult issues often for staff and workers, how to get a pay rise from their employer. And we've discussed the current climate as well of relationships between employers and employees, labour relations. Thank you very much for joining us. What we'd like to do is perhaps speak about your experience last week in court and on some of your cases. Any anecdotes you can share with us, and any things you'd like to mention from the last 7 days of legal work?
Oh, that's a good question. I know you like to throw in a wild card. I would say it's it's very it's a very good idea for us to still continue having remote hearings at the moment, because what is often overlooked is either on the claimant side, which is often the case, or even on the respondent side. So whichever side, there may be some issues regarding disability, and it may not be possible for a party to attend in person on a practical level. So I think it's been a great experience that we're still continuing as much as we can on a remote basis and hearing those cases remotely. However, There have been incidents where one party can't get on to a hearing. So we have had some cases which, despite trying numerous strategies, one of the parties could not get on. So we've had some wasted time. And with remote hearings, it can be very much more tiring, and judges are often quite keen to press on. If a matter's been listed for a number of days, you often find that because you're looking at technology all day, you're looking at that screen all day, you need to really take that time out in the evening to switch off and not be staring at a screen. So there's pros and cons in doing that. And from a practical point of view, cross-examination is taking a lot longer, and is challenging because you can't see the whites of the eyes of the witnesses as you can in person. So it can be difficult in terms of cross examination. And there was a funny point when I was cross examining a claimant and realize that it will be going over to the next day. When I gave a estimation in terms of it will be another 2 hours, I definitely saw her eyes pop out at this, when I saw her on the screen. So it's quite comical, some of the things that you do end up seeing and witnessing during these remote hearings, I would say.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And of course, with remote hearings, it's much easier. You don't have to travel to courts and tribunals all over the country. I know that as a solicitor and barristers, you often have to travel hundreds of miles. The hearing could be in Wales or in London and you're the other side of the country. So the remote hearings are certainly very useful in terms of saving time and expense. And I think they're probably here to stay.
Yeah, I would agree. And hopefully they are, because they I find that they are more efficient. This is a more efficient system. So it's a case of balancing those needs depending on the types of claims involved. It's a case of the tribunal having a look at a practical level as well and seeing, what's the best way to deal with these cases.
Kulwinder, Kaur, thank you very much for joining us on the legal show, sharing your thoughts and giving some of your expert knowledge, discussing these very important matters for both employees and employers. Thank you very much. We look forward to speaking to you again next week, and have a great week ahead. I'm sure you'll have lots more to tell us about your legal work. There's never a dull moment, and it's quite expected. And there's a lot of challenges in legal work. Perhaps people don't realise, and I know as a fellow solicitor, that it's very challenging and it's a difficult profession, and it needs a lot of time and dedication.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a pleasure as always being here, Davinder. Thank you so much to yourself and the Sikh channel for having me. And I look forward to joining you again next week.
Thank you very much. Sat Sri Akal ji. Have a lovely week.
You too.